Now loading this month's Leadership Live, where we dive in deep with today's top MedTech leaders, allowing you the chance to learn from the best. Leadership Live starts now.
Welcome everyone to our first exclusive Clinical Leadership Live. I'm Morgan Mills, Senior Talent Director here at FloodGate. I spearhead our cardiology and vascular recruiting, and I have the pleasure of having Curt Cornell, who is Merit Vascular's VP of Business Development and Clinical Services, here with us today. Curt, can you start by, I know we've had a lot of time to work together. Yeah. I've been fortunate to kind of place a lot of your clinical specialist positions recently, but can you tell the team a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I've been in med device 25 years. I've held various roles: marketing, sales management, and most recently leadership. Prior to that, I helped build an international business for Merit Medical, the company I'm in now, and I spent 7 years traveling the globe building that. So I've had a little
bit of it all.
I've had the opportunity to kind of touch almost all the commercial disciplines within med device.
Yeah. What made you, from being a clinician, to move in? We'll keep that part brief, but would love to know why that.
I get that question all the time, and it really resides around taking the knowledge I learned from the clinic and parlaying it into a sector of healthcare where development occurs, launching the excitement of launching new products, introducing new therapies to the clinical space through the private sector or the commercial side, meaning med device.
Absolutely. And I'll dive right in, but I think that's the first question a lot of our viewers want to know, or healthcare providers and clinicians wanting to transition into the industry. What would you tell them if they want to move into the medical device industry? What would you tell them? What challenges could they anticipate? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. There's always a lot of interest in med device. In the clinical roles coming out of the clinic or the hospital setting. I think the first bit of advice I would give somebody is network. Meet people in this space doing the job now and learn what their payoffs are, what their pain points may or may not be. Understand the functional role as best you can, because it varies by company, it varies by clinical discipline, and it quite honestly varies day to day. So I would first start with educate yourself by networking. Networking is a powerful thing, as you know. Network within the folks that you know in the industry now. And at the same time, learn as much about the technology or the space of interest that you plan to pursue, because you can tend to inadvertently take that first opportunity in med device, and it's not aligned with your core interests clinically.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on that day-to-day, right? I mean, as a nurse before, right? You clock in at a certain time. You have med pass at a certain time. Your day's set for you, and it's like that every single day, unless you're in certain critical care units and things get a little wild sometimes. But what's the core difference, and why is not every clinician good for a clinical specialist role? Tell us a little bit about that.
Wow. It's multifaceted. I think you nailed it. In the clinic, it's an algorithmic-based day-to-day. You show up at a defined time, you leave at a defined time. Your decisions, for the most part, are observational, and then a reactive input is made from that clinically, right? In med device, the skill sets are different. You need that core clinical competency because you're filling a clinical role. But where the softer skills come into play, I think in a more amplified way, are when you get into the aspect of relationship building, the EQ component of the person, the ability to be comfortable being uncomfortable. That's a big one.
Huge.
In the clinic, we're all competent, we're well trained. Things are, for the most part, like I said a minute ago, scripted. And on this side of the fence, they're not. So you have to be able to pivot. You have to be comfortable with change. You have to be comfortable with direction that you may or may not agree with. But you still have to embody the messaging. And so it's not one thing. But for me, it starts 100% with pushing yourself out of that comfort zone and embracing it.
Totally.
Willing to learn and grow from it, that will set you up early on in the transition for success.
Yeah, it looks totally different from being in healthcare to med device.
100%.
And on that, I mean, everyone wants to make the transition, or a lot of people do, or they're intrigued by it. But again, not everyone is meant for that. What does make the best clinical specialist? How do the best ones bring value to a sales organization? Because ultimately it is a sales organization. And like if they're in med device, they're selling products to physicians. Tell us about, some of the top clinical specialists what makes them that way?
Well, it all quite honestly starts with trust. The foundation of all relationships is trust.
Yep.
The clinical folks who are very skilled at developing the relationships and garnering the trust with their partner sales counterparts in the sales side of the organization are the ones who are brought into the fold earlier. They're vetted by the sales team really quick because, as you transition out of the clinic to industry, you're bringing a really strong clinical skill set. That soft-sided, the EQ, relationship building, the ability to manage autonomy. Yeah. None of that exists in the clinic. At the same level, it's a little bit different dynamic. So the ones, to answer your question, the ones that I think do the best are the ones that are able to integrate within teams in an effective way, not a forceful way. Meaning what I mean by effective, collaborative, value add. They are bringing value to the commercial team, and that's perceived by their team members. And that can be accomplished through pure clinical acumen. It can be accomplished through the ability to develop relationships in accounts, for example, where, let's say, sales representatives haven't been able to bridge the gap. You bring in the clinical layer of expertise. You're viewed through a little different lens by the customer, and sometimes that's enough to open the door. So the clinical folks that can harness that and channel it in the correct sectors as the day-to-day of their job are the ones that I think are the most successful. But I have to be really clear. Just because you're good clinically doesn't mean you're good as a clinical in the industry.
And I think because you kind of hit on it, right? In the clinical setting, you are kind of told what to do, or you have tasks, right? You're very task oriented. Yes, you have tasks to do in the industry, but it's more like, where are those opportunities? Where are the gaps in education for the physicians? How can we, let my rep know that, right? So we can drive new business, drive new utilization, because no one is going to tell you to do that. You got to be autonomous enough and have that EQ piece to want to be the best there. No, that's great. And we could probably spend an hour on interviewing Curt.
Easily an hour on just EQ, right?
Yeah, in on EQ. Yeah, but give us a nugget, right? If, a clinician's interviewing to break in, what's that one thing they should get right if they're interviewing for a medical device job?
A couple of things. It's not just one.
I was going to boil it down to one, but we'll be on this for an hour.
It starts with understand your strengths and weaknesses and be able to speak to those and in the interview process, number one. But I have to couch what I'm getting ready to say with a little bit of a qualifier.
Totally.
In that the rogue clinical interview in a hospital is here's my education, here are my credentials, here's my experience, here are my letters of references. Therefore, you should trust me.
And it's like one interview.
One interview.
One.
Therefore, you should trust me. I'm clinically competent, and I'm going to do no harm if you hire me, right?
Yeah.
Patient first. In the corporate world, it's a different interview, okay? You need to be able to articulate your strengths and weaknesses. And weaknesses, the ability to articulate and to know and articulate your weaknesses is as important, if not more, than your strengths, right? Yeah. But my experience interviewing clinical folks that are looking to transition to industry over many years is they don't ask for the job. You need a reason when you get up from that table in that interview to have a reason to engage that person again, a reason to follow up, a reason to communicate, a reason to remind them who you are and what value you can bring to that organization, which is the third part that I was going to mention.
Love it.
Figure out how you can bring value to the needs that organization has during that interview process. It is not a typical hospital-based interview. It's all about the parlaying of value
Yep.
within the context of the role.
Yeah.
And interestingly, you may share something with the people who are interviewing you that they never thought of, and it might be enough to separate you from your other candidates,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a competitive interview process, right? There's a lot of other people with a lot of other experience. So if you can set yourself apart in any way, absolutely. I love it. And when I think about that too, in understanding where you can bring value, I think a big thing I see is like, do you have any questions about this role? And they're like, no, I'm good. And I'm like,
I hear that a
you're
lot.
making a career transition, like bring questions. And then back to the core thing is, follow up or ask for a next step.
I find myself, those are great, all relevant and great points.
Yeah.
I find myself in a lot of interviews having to recalibrate my expectations when I go into the clinical interview. I tend to bring a sales kind of mindset to, opening, qualifying, closing, that whole process of interview.
Yeah.
And I find the narrative reversing where I'm controlling the narrative in an interview. A person who is very adept and skilled at interviewing will control the narrative during an interview.
Yeah.
And it's few and far between in the clinical sector. It's just not a place that we're accustomed to, meaning the interview. It's a different style. It's you're selling yourself in a different way.
Totally. Yeah. Or then the follow up and then the multiple interview versus one. Absolutely. Well, again, we'll have to do a series 2 on interviewing. But we've kind of talked about getting into industry challenges, what to expect day to day, and then some nuggets on interviewing. But I want to go towards, you're at a very high level at Merit right now, coming from a clinical background, and there was a lot of work in between. I'm very warm on you guys and what you're doing. I love your team. I love your culture, and I love you as a leader, getting to work with you on the hiring manager side. But I want to segue to leadership.
Sure.
A lot of people want to know a lot and how to be the best. Talk to me a little bit about management versus leadership. Is there a difference? What are your thoughts there?
Night and day difference.
Yeah.
A good manager doesn't make a good leader.
Yeah.
Managers, again, my philosophy, I subscribe to a doctrine that, makes who I am. And I firmly believe that, managers task manage. Leaders develop and grow people.
Absolutely.
Now, they're both intertwined to an extent, but the true definition of a leader is one who invests in the growth of people. The people are is that person's primary concern. And the non-monetary payoff is seeing the growth in people. Managers don't look through that lens.
Yeah.
They tend to manage to tasks or process.
Yeah.
So they're process managers versus people developers.
Yep. And in your experience, when you're doing that well and you're developing your people, and I know it's person and it's professional, but I think I've seen it, in my personal experience moving into leadership, a lot more recent than yourself. But if you're developing your people right, and that's in every area they're looking, and that is professional, what's that difference in really focusing on developing your people rather than managing them? I know you said sometimes it's not monetary, but, why is that so important?
Yeah, I think I understand your question.
Yeah.
I think as a leader, it's not just core strength development and reinforcement. It's getting into the EQ, having somebody understand self, understanding their strengths and weaknesses, and resourcing things around them to take those weaknesses and move them up the continuum.
Yeah.
That's developing and helping a person grow professionally and personally because they're both intertwined.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You can't separate the two.
Totally. Especially in sales, because all of that is EQ and relationship building and relationship
100%.
management. And this is clinical or sales or
Yeah.
all of it. Yeah. Awesome. I love it. It's funny, I just did an Admired Leadership series, and they talk about, and this is something I might struggle with a little bit because I'm still kind of player coach, but it's taking the time to lead. And sometimes that is, making more one-on-ones or developing people in certain areas, or that's kind of looking at your tracking system, whatever it is in terms of metrics or whatever. What's a hack you can give about taking time to lead? Just in because you're leading a big team at a huge organization. I'm just curious, what's that look like for you?
It, I used to not be the way I'm getting ready to describe, but because of the context of the question you just asked, I am this way now. It's almost a regimen. I get up every day and I do 3 or 4 of the same things every day for consistency. That's a touch point with a person on one of the teams,
Yeah.
right? It's checking social media, following FloodGate's posts on things. I see them all the time, as you know. It's kind of it, and if you read any kind of principles on leadership, and if you study people who are highly effective leaders, they will tell you this.
I love that.
That they have a regimen.
But that's setting time each and every day, so I love it. It makes total sense.
Yeah, I call it a regimen. It's more, these are the 3 or 4 core things that I will not touch today.
Got it.
Meaning it's an everyday touch point, and it involves people.
Yep. It
involves analysis of the business, and it involves strategy.
I love that.
Those are the 3 things that the day closes. If I have not done those, then I have not really followed kind of the script or the logic that I employ.
No, that's absolutely, that's what I'm realizing and learning, and I love to hear that it's consistent with a best practice that you've done. So that's awesome. And then I like this, I'll flip it a little bit. What are some lessons you learned the hard way in terms of leadership?
We could have a whole podcast on that, right?
Yeah.
Effective leaders are ones who set reasonable expectations for themselves. Mm-hmm. They allow themselves to make mistakes, and I've done that. I think the number one, and this has shifted over the years. So 5 years ago, if you'd asked me, the answer would have been different than what you're going to hear now, right? That's growth,
That's
right?
growth. It should always be that way.
That's right. So it's focus. My number one error that I put in the forefront of my thoughts all the time is stop focusing on process and focus more on people, because people drive the process. Yeah. So if you have the inverse, if you're in 5-10 years ago, I was a process focused, driven, outcomes analysis kind of mindset. I've shifted now. If you have the right people on the teams, which I currently do, around me, and you trust them and you empower them and you resource them, you'd be amazed what they can do. Yeah. So I've shifted from years ago, kind of in a growth mindset, right? From stop focusing on process, let the people who are good at that focus on process, and focus more on the people themselves.
I love it. I love it. Absolutely. And then when I'm thinking about that, we all have to have some mentor, some leader that inspired us to be better. So I'm just curious, and you don't have to name drop if you don't want to, but just who, you do not have to, but what leader was it, and why would you choose them as someone that you really identify with and was like kind of a mentor for leadership?
What a great question. Because I spoke to him this morning.
Yeah.
He lives on the east coast of Florida.
Yeah.
I spent 10 years in a startup, and we were putting a technology and a therapy on the map that didn't exist. And the CEO of that company brought me in as a third employee and taught me more than I ever could have asked for. Yeah. Let me make mistakes, let me be successful in areas, reeled me in when I needed to be reeled in, was a true mentor, and here's why he was so effective. He was authentic. What you saw was him. Mm-hmm. And that set the stage for me going forward as a learning process that if you're not an authentic leader, people are going to see through it.
And that means in every aspect.
Every aspect.
Yeah, I'm blanking on the leadership book. It's like 21 Lessons in Leadership or something, and that was one of them.
Yes, authenticity.
In every area of your life.
100%. Yeah. And I could, his name was Paul, and I could rattle off a whole day's worth of amazing aspects of that man. Yeah. But if I were to boil it down,
I love it.
He was authentically who he is.
Love it.
Good and bad.
Yeah.
But I knew what kind of person he was, and that drove implicit trust. Mm-hmm. Loyalty, trust, and it was a safe place for me to learn and make mistakes. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was honestly the springboard to leadership stuff later on. Absolutely,
absolutely. I love it. And to kind of segue, last question here for you. I'm a big bookie. I love to learn and get better and improve. So I love getting recommendations. But for all the aspiring leaders or people who are crushing it in leadership, what's one leadership book that really stood out to you, and why?
I think I'll answer your question, but I have to really qualify it with this. Depending on where you are in your leadership journey, there are a million books out there.
Yeah.
And they
That's
all,
fair point.
you know,
Fair
they
point.
all have their own kind of philosophies and, you know, subscribe to this doctrine, take these 3 pieces.
Maybe we should do a leadership book club.
Yes. Hey, let's do
Just
it.
kidding.
I've read enough of them.
Yeah.
But to be an effective leader, and this is why I'm going to tell you this book, to be an effective leader, you have to know yourself. That's the deep EQ side. What were the crucible moments in your life that you experienced that shaped why you are and who you are today?
Yeah.
So the foundation for that philosophy is a book called True North.
Cool.
And I have everybody on my teams read them.
Yep.
Both our directors that I have on the 3 teams have read it. There's self-assessment exercises in this book.
Yep.
It helps you get in touch and understand why you say and do the things you do. And so to be an authentic leader, if you don't understand yourself.
I was just going to go back to it. If you really have to like evaluate yourself, those moments that made you.
You have to flip the mirror around.
To be authentic enough to be the best leader. Yeah.
Because if you don't know yourself, you know, what are you bringing to work every day that
Yeah.
people are experiencing,
Or
right?
how do you build people up, you know? Yeah, absolutely. That is all I've got for you today, but it's been an absolute pleasure, Curt. I can't thank you enough for coming into our office,
you.
giving us a little bit nuggets on, you know, how to break into the industry, some best practices. And then honestly, you're one of my favorite leaders I've worked
Thank
with.
you.
And it's always really cool hearing perspective. So thank you.
Thanks for the invite and thanks for the time.
Of course.